Welcome to Sin City, the city of dream, the place where you can be the best of you. Jane says in a sarcastic tone as she walked past the well lit billboard overhead looking out of place. In the otherwise dark street, the contrast between the billboard and the surrounding is so huge that it almost feels otherworldly for it to be there. It is a giant billboard, after all. It's nothing fancy, though, not more than a picture of a man who's smiling as wide as he could, just like a model does in dental commercial. Beside his enormous portrait is just some generic-looking tall buildings. Like I said, nothing fancy. It's ridiculously clean, though, compared to the dusty street just beneath it. The mayor seems to have some obsession about cleanliness, at least for his portrait. Jane looks on with disgust as the nearly dustless surface catches her eye. She can only imagine how the people who clean it must feel. Yet, she must say that she is impressed that they managed to keep them clean, no matter how dirty the surrounding is. Jane thought as she stared at the billboard for a few good seconds before rolling her eye. Yeah, whatever you say, Chief. This place sure looks dead enough to me, though, Jane mumbles as she walks past it. She doesn't exaggerate, though. The dim lamppost, pale parchment, and the litters around, at first glance, the street sure look deserted. Jane looks around occasionally as she continues to walk through the empty and silent street. It's hard to believe that she was just minutes away from one of the red light districts, which, unlike here, is bustling with people. Surely anyone can tell the different atmosphere between the two. Sometimes, even people who live here feel like they have traveled through times, not to mention dark alleys along the street. The 90s neon light certainly doesn't provide much vision, much less security. As eerie as seems, Jane certainly doesn't seem to care, though. Instead, she acts like nothing is going on. Unbelievably, she walks nonchalantly while humming some kind of song as she walks on the dark and quiet street, without a care of her safety and surrounding. At one point, she even took out a wad of cash from her leather jacket, and you can see the shines in her eye as she begins to count each of it while nodding happily as the papers scrub with her fingers, making a somewhat comforting sound in the silent street with nothing but the sound of her footsteps. Completely ignoring the fact that it's rather dangerous for someone to walk around with that money out in the open, especially in such a notorious district, all the rumor of robbery and rapes doesn't seem to worry her at all. People call it Lower Ridge. It's known as the more dangerous part of the Sin City, known the ever-increasing crime rates. Ah, so it's what it feels like to have a pocket full of cash. Seriously. I can get addicted to this feeling, really. Jane exclaims as she continues to walk whilst laughing a little. What a strange old man, though, paying me so much for an easy job like this. Talk about fee disparity. Jane chuckles as she speaks out loud, as she never expected that the old man from the evening would pay her this much for a couple of photos of his old lover. Old people sure do have some strange obsession. I guess I should try accepting more jobs from these old-timers. Perhaps they don't have much time to spend their fortune. Jane mumbles while laughing evilly before she continues to count the greenback even more spirited, while licking her finger from time to time, as the cold air around is drying up her fingers, making it rather hard to count the money as paper stuck on her fingertip occasionally. Suddenly, she stops right at the entrance at one of the alleys. Then her lips curve into a smile as she can feel a pair of eye watching her intensely, like an eagle watching its prey. Whoever is standing still inside, like a statue in the dark alley watching over her. Not that she is bothered, though, and instead she hold out the wad of cash and raise her arm in the air, swinging it a little, as if she is showing it off to whoever watching her from a distance, so they can have a better look. And just as she predicted, the person inside makes a move, rushing out of the dark alley. From looking at the shadowy, bulky figure, Jane could tell that it's a man, and his hand is holding some metallic object, which glints from time to time as the man swinging it as he runs toward her. Jane, on the other hand, is seemingly unfazed by the fact that a man is charging toward her, probably armed with a knife. In fact, she is standing there all the time, barely moving. Is she too scared to move? One might think so after seeing how she's reacting. Yet if you can see her face at the time, you probably will think that this is not the case. Instead of the face of fear, her face looks somewhat excited. her eye looking at the man expectantly, as if waiting for him to charge and swing his knife at her, despite the fact she was unarmed and alone. At one point, she even smiles and closes her eyes, mumbles some inaudible words as the silence of the street is quickly replaced by sound of heavy footsteps. True enough, it was a big man with short hair, looking right to be in his late 30s, his hand holding some kind of knife, maybe 12 inches or something. Yet something just looks weird about him. His neck and hand are rather soft looking. For a man who's been on the street, to be honest, he looks kind of out of place, if not for his burly and rather big frame. And there he is, just a few feet from Jane, yet he doesn't make any move. Instead, he lowers his head, his chest moving repeatedly in an up and down motion as he struggles to take in air, probably exhausted from all that running, though he quickly points the knife at Jane, at telling her to stop, of course with his hand still shaking, causing Jane to snicker at the man's attempt to intimidate her, despite himself being at such a bad shape. "Stop right there, woman, and hand me that money, unless you want me to cut your pretty face and send you home crying." The man shouts at Jane while trying to look as intimidating as he could despite the fact that he is still panting, albeit slower now. With that, Jane can no longer hold back her laughter and start laughing, completely ignoring the man whose face looking red now with shame. "Hey, old man, do I look like I'm moving to you?" "Look, I'm not going anywhere, old man. So catch your breath before you open that stupid mouth of yours. Seriously, man, can you even catch a girl with stamina like that?" Jane said with a serious face, after containing her laughter, and she approaches the man, which merely responded with an angry grunt, probably unsure of what to make of Jane's response. Ignoring his confused face, Jane continues to get closer to him, her hand still holding the wad of cash, which makes the man's eyes shine for each step she takes, as if he feels that he's closer to his goal. For each step Jane takes, a fact that Jane seems to be aware of, that she deliberately held it out as she continues to approach the man, and suddenly she slips it back to her jacket when she was just a feet away from him, furthering anger the man. No offense, man, but from looking at your dumb-looking face and awkward movement, I can tell that you're not exactly from the top of the food chain. Isn't that right, old man? I would have just turned back and pretend you never saw me if I were you," Jane said with a smirk as she stares at the man up close, sizing he up, causing the man to blurt out in anger. "Just who do you think you are, bitch?" the man says with a reddened face as he points the knife at Jane. "You better do as I say, or I will show you what I'm capable of doing." The man continues. This time, he actually extends his hand, trying to grab Jane's neck as she is within his reaching distance. Too bad for him, though, as Jane seems all too aware of the man's plan, that she grabs his wrist even before he fully extends his hand. His shocked face soon turns to contort with pain as Jane gives his arm a little twist. "Ah, damn, it hurts. Let go of my hand, you crazy bitch." The man screams in pain as he struggles to free his hand from Jane's hold, and when that fails, he then swings his other hand at Jane, which is the hand that's been holding the knife, to with Jane respond with revolver, an even harder twist, making his whole body twist along trying to minimize the pain on his left arm. "I wouldn't recommend doing that, old man, unless you need more stimulation," Jane says as she increases the pressure on the grip, while put up her finger pointing at the man's right hand. Surprisingly, the man lowers his gaze in fear and immediately pulled back his arm, and after which he actually stared back at his own hand, as if in disbelief that he actually did that. "Good. As dense as you are, you sure do learn fast," Jane says as she lets go of the man's arm while smiling a little, letting him take a few steps back while squirming in pain. Poor guy is so afraid that he seems to avoid looking at Jane. "Listen, old man, it's an important thing you know. To survive in this city, you either learn what you should do and what you shouldn't do, or end up dying not knowing the reason at all. It's how it works ever since I came to know this place." Jane continues to talk even as she has turns away from the man, with sadness in her voice as she finishes her sentences. "Wait, please, can you at least give me something, ma'am? The people I work with will kill me if I actually go back empty-handed. Anything at all so I can give them something," the man says in a pleading tone while clasping his hand, which almost makes Jane feel bad for laughing at him earlier. Yet she can't help but to be annoyed by his words, evidently so that Jane's eyebrow curls upon hearing the man's word, as if in disbelief. So, you think I should give you something after all this? And why should I even care? Seriously, men and their stupid brain, you should be glad that I'm in a good mood, or you would be going back home crawling all the way instead. Suck it up, old man. Jane says as she continues further, leaving the man sitting there staring blankly at her back with her walking away further. Shit, I really don't want to die. The man mumbles, fear shown on his face as he stares at his own feet. The sheer despair in his voice actually causes Jane to stop and turn back. Hey, old man, tell them you got it from Jay. Maybe you will get some punches and kicks, but I guarantee that you will live to see the sun tomorrow. Jane says while throwing some coins for the man. Not much, though, but it's the name that she gives him that matters, as she is quite sure even the street gang has heard her name before. Oh? Before I go, I do have another tips for you. Take off your wedding ring the next time when you're trying to rob someone. It just makes your action look even more ridiculous, or not mention your wife would be proud of it. Jane says as she turns around for a moment and leaving the dumb, founded man staring at the ring on his hand, and then the coins Jane throws at him with tears in his eyes and maybe a hint of shame. Shit, this city sure never failed to disappoint me. Jane says after a few blocks away from the man, almost whispering as if worried people might have heard her. She knows that he's probably just robbing people so he can feed his wife and child, but then harming others' daughter and wife just to feed yours is just selfish and disgusting act. But even then, deep down, there's just this feeling that Jane can't seem to shake, as if Jane can feel their desperation. Perhaps it's why Jane decides to tell the man her name. It would be saddening, after all, as he is killed like that. Gang leaders can be unforgiving. You wanted to hunt in their turf, then you have to be able to pay them back. Or else, such is the rules of this city, even being a Triad member doesn't keep you safe. Ironic fact considering they joined Triad to protect themselves. Jane thoughts as she continues to walk. Jane laughs after a few steps away, though, berating herself for having such a silly thought. This is Sin City, after all, the very place she grew up. It's always known to be a dangerous city, but still, you can't deny that these days, the city been getting worse, though. To be fair, this city was never been a good place for people to live. Even years before, when Jane was still a kid, lurking around searching for scraps of food and stuff, this city was already a chaotic place. Crime and gang rapes are running rampant, though it's not until now that the level of violence has become intolerable. Back then, robbery and murder are done in a deceit way. You heard and saw people disappear, but you can't really find the bodies of the victim. But now the garbage disposal workers would be surprised if they don't find a body snuck into those garbage's deposits these days. And also, years ago, the streets were filled with children, mostly homeless children. They are running around, picking fight with each other, stealing things and money from vendors and causing troubles around the city. Yet despite all that, most of them are able to make it to adulthood, even in those rough conditions. Nowadays, though, children are rarely seen in the city. Perhaps you would think that the rapes problems have been decreasing? No, in fact, it's only been getting worse since then. It's not uncommon to hear the cry of women in the dark alleys. There are even reports of women getting raped in broad daylight. Sometimes it's just a matter of time before something like that to happen for women who've been living here. But why are there no more homeless children, like it was years ago, you ask? Simple. It's the life of the street that has become too tough for them to survive. Of course, you got a few lucky ones who are able to grow up, some to become decent people, while some turn to the life of crime, repeating the cruel cycle of the city. But really, most of the children don't really make it to adulthood, ending up dead even before their pages of life unfold. Some of them starved to death. Some were fighting to death over food and shelter, while most of them just disappear, as if there's a force that pulling them into the void, leaving no traces behind. Not that anyone would have bothered to find them, though, even if there's a clue to their disappearance. Such is the life of the stray children. Worthless, the adults would say. The words of the streets say, those children falls victim to the trafficking ring, though, being promised salvations. These children don't even know the nightmares awaits them. It's probably true, Jane thought. They are indeed brought into salvation. Literally, though, these poor children probably end up being sold. Worse is that some of them are being killed just like livestock, just so the trafficking rings could harvest their organs. Those are highly sought after, with those big monies to be made. It's easy to see why these traffickers don't even hesitate to butcher those poor children. It sounds even crueler that some of them is actually once homeless children to begin with. Just the thought of these children suffering and have their life ended even before it unfolds alone is angering Jane, in which she punched the nearest light pole to her, leaving a big dent coupled with a loud ringing sound vibrating the empty street. This kind of sucks. Jane, though, thinking back, it was one of the reasons Jane decided to come back to this place. After all, she wanted to find out why and where these children were taken away. But all this while, she felt that she's just going around in circle. The people living here doesn't even care. Even the police are strangely silent. What's frustrating is that she is sure murders that been carried out at this rate are sure to leave some traces. There must be a reason, Jane thought. There's something bigger behind it. Something is preventing the police to interfere. Even Tseng, a police detective, is as clueless as she is. Jane always have a theory, though. Probably one of the conglomerates is behind them. Just the thought of it makes Jane blood boil as she lash out another punch, harder this time, making the already bent pole looking like it is about to topple. One of these days, I will definitely get to the bottom of it, Jane thought as she continues to walk. Once again, silence fills the air as the only sound is the occasional tapping from Jane's boot. Again, the concrete as she drags her feet from time to time, probably still thinking about her earlier encounter with the man. Suddenly, a scream breaks the silence of the air. A high-pitched scream. Jane's body tenses as her senses are quickly returning. Her first reaction is to move herself to the closest building and hide, lowering her body. Jane tries to heighten her senses, trying to find out where his sound is coming from. She is so focused that she stops in that position for a few seconds before she heard another voice coming from the corner across the street. It was a woman voice, despite sounding muffled. Ah, it's coming from there. Jane notes to herself as she now narrows her eyes to focus on the dark corner not far away from her while she runs slowly towards it. Her heart races as she sees what she had feared has happened. It is a rape scene, just as she thought, one of the many bad things that could happen to a woman this late in the city. From like 10 meters away, Jane witnessed what's happening. Lying in the concrete floor is a woman with a black dress, which has been torn apart as she trashes around vigorously, struggling against the man that's pinning on her, who's been forcing himself upon her, casually tearing her dress away as he carried the inhumane act, ignoring the woman's helpless struggles. He is a big man, after all. Jane estimates he is at least 250 pounds, muscles and all. She bet he could knock out the relatively small woman with even a slap. Nevertheless, the woman continues to push him off as best as she could. Jane's heart swells with anger and admiration as she is shocked by both the man action and also the woman's resilience. "Hey," Jane calls out to the big guy, as she is now only a few meters away from them. She actually manages to make the big man stop momentarily, perhaps a little bit shocked too. And she takes a deep breath as she is to see the woman's condition up close. She can only guess the fear and the pain she feels as she is surrounded by not only the big guy, but also 3 other sinister-looking men standing right behind the 2 of them. Those 3 didn't notice Jane, though, as they are too busy ogling the woman while cheering on their big buddy who continuously ravishing the woman, even more spirited, ignoring Jane's presence. All of them are armed with at least a knife, and the big one even carries a gun. Jane notes to herself as she observes each of the men, no matter how she looks at it. Their weapons and equipment are still too much for men who are merely looking to prey on a single woman. Even considering this city reputation, these are still not your average rapist. Jane concludes as she turns her attention back to the woman. Jane was so focused on the others that she didn't even realize that the woman is looking at her all the while, and it was the moment their eye met for the first time. Her heart races. Jane is immediately hit with mixture of emotions as she looked into the woman's teary eyes. In her eyes, she saw fear, pain, sadness, and perhaps even rage, with a tint of envious, not only for these men before him, but probably also for Jane, as if she feels angry that Jane was merely looking down at her without doing anything to help. Jane is sure that in this moment, the woman must be hoping that Jane is in her place instead. Jane couldn't blame her, though. They are both young women after all, with the woman probably slightly older than she is. Technically, this could happen to either of them. It was merely chance that the woman got here before Jane. No doubt the woman is thinking the same thing, so much that she couldn't even focus on her situation, so much that she actually turns back from time to time, looking at Jane, even while she continues to struggle to push off the man all the while. Jane is standing still, though, yet her mind races just as fast as her heart. She grits her teeth as she wonders if she should interfere at all. The old Jane would have confronted these men in a heartbeat. But now, after years of misfortunes and bitter experience, Jane learns that often the things in this city are usually not as simple as they are seen. When you're looking at things hard enough, you can always find that they are more behind how things happen. Deceptions, sadly, aren't something lacking in this cruel city. Unfortunately, Jane learns the hard way in the past, and there's no way she would fall into the same bullshit over again after all this time. Sure, it looks like a typical crime, where women are being raped by man, but it can also be someone trying to play tricks on her. Jane said to herself as she, while pondering about it deep in her mind. Suddenly the man shouts at Jane, waking her up from her deep thought. "Hey, bitch, what are you dangling there for? You better get out here while I'm still busy handling this stubborn bitch, or you would have prayed that you are never here." The big guys shout at Jane in an intimidating voice while motioning Jane to get out of there, while Jane looks on, unamused by his words, leaving the man looking even more confused before looking back, his buddies behind him. Jane's lack of response surely ticked the man off, though. Evidently by his flustered face. It didn't last, though, as his face quickly turned into a somewhat creepy smile. He then turned back and shouted to the men behind them. "Hey, boys, look at this crazy bitch we got here, literally telling us to rape her as well. What do you say, boys?" The big guy continues, but this time to his buddy behind him. With them expressing agreement almost in the same time as they all burst into laughter, Jane felt her blood boil with rage as she looks at these men's face, wanting to wipe those creepy smiles of their face in that instant. Amazingly, even all this taunting and laughter, Jane is still standing down her hand. Something is amiss, and really not what typical rapists usually do, Jane thought. Why would they taunt her instead of just come and grab her? Perhaps they are waiting for her to act. Jane can only imagine whatever scheme they are trying to pull, knowing full well what her enemies are capable of. Their grudge run deep after all. Seriously, dude, whoever your boss is, tell them that I don't have time for their little games. If they really wanted to do it, then try to do it in a more creative way, Jane said in an equally intimidating voice as she turns around, leaving these men dumbfounded. Surprisingly, though, they seem brush off what Jane has said just as fast and return their attention to the poor woman, who is now screaming for Jane to stop. Her voice cracks as the woman probably didn't expect Jane's reaction, who is not even turning around despite the woman screaming at the top of her lung. "Just keep going forward, Jane. It's just a scam." Jane closes her eyes and reminds herself as she fastens her pace. Truth to be told, she is still unsure if she is doing the right thing. But there's one thing she is sure, though, is the fact that if it's not a scheme, then the woman will not make it until tomorrow. For this city, it's just another person in another body bag, though. For Jane, though, it's as if she had killed the woman herself. Still, you can't never be too careful in this city. Jane recalled the various dangerous situations she was in just for trying to help people. "Jez, forget about it, Jane. Hot bath and Coke is waiting for us in the home." She repeated several times in her mind as to convince herself. Suddenly, Jane felt a light tugging on her leg, which almost made her trip. The hell? Who leaves a stone here? Jane exclaims as she is drawn back into reality, feeling disoriented for a moment as she realized that she is now a few blocks away from the woman. Just then, Jane felt the tugging once more, but this time it feels wet. Jane looks down this time, and what she sees next almost makes even a strong willed woman like her scream out in shock. Turn out, it is a little girl, probably no more than 5, trying desperate to hold Jane's leg with her little fingers, which has been stained and red with blood. It's impressive that she's doing it even as she can barely lift her head off the ground. Hey, what happened to you, little girl? Jane asks in a concerned voice as she bends down and tries to lift the little girl head off the ground, only to be surprised by the little girl blood staining her hand and sleeve. Jane looks closer, taking a deep breath as to contain her shock. She feels her heart wrenched in pain as she saw what happened to the girl's face. It was a large gash, messy and bloodied wound. Someone must have dragged the poor kid face across some hard surface. Oh gods, who could have done this to a little girl like she is? Jane thought as her heart mixed with both anger and sadness. Imagining the pain this little girl must have felt all this while, tears form in the corner of her eyes. As she looked into the little girl's lifeless eye, her little body is tensed, probably because of the adrenaline flowing through her body. Jane is only worried that the shock and the pain the little kid would feel as adrenaline dissipates. She needs immediate medical attention. Jane continues as she quickly taking out her phone, trying to type in the number of the hospital with the shaky fingers. Jane knows exactly what it feels like to be in such a pain. She had led a quite dangerous life after all. Dangers and injuries are something that's never missing throughout her life. But there is just this wound she can't never forget. It was when she is still but a child, perhaps a little bit older than the kid before her, even though she had to endure a lot of pain and suffering as a child. There's one incident that's really stood out from what she had experienced. It was a time that she felt that life was ending for her, genuinely fear for her own life. She remembered the day like it had happened yesterday. The pain when someone felt when their bone is being crushed is just something that one can never forget. It's also when Jane's life was turned upside down for the first time, losing everything she once cared about. Even though she wondered if it's the physical she had felt or the emotional pain of losing everyone she cared about that deeply implanted the memories deep within her mind. One thing she knows for sure is that she doesn't want this little girl to experience that. Jane reminds herself as she continues to call the hospital, which seemed to be not picking up her call. Shit, even hospital in this city is rotten. Jane curses, gritting her teeth as to herself from throwing away her own phone. Suddenly, the little girl tightened the grip on Jane's, as if trying to get her attention. Jane bent down and moved her head closer to the little girl's face. Please save my mother," the little girl pleads with a soft whisper while pointing to the direction to where Jane had earlier come from, before she loosened her grip on Jane. The little girl probably had used up all her remaining strength trying to deliver the message, leaving Kane in anguish, as she realized that her mother, the little girl refers to, must be the woman that she left behind. God damn it, Jane. Look at what you've done. Jane berating herself as she punched the concrete wall in front of her, venting her frustration. Not that things have come to this. She know that she have to make some hard decisions. The first is going back for the woman. Taking this choice mean that she will have to leave this child unattended with wound this bad. No doubt she might actually lose her life. Will her mother be grateful for Jane, abandoning her daughter to save her? Is that what the woman really wanted, saving herself over her child? And there's always a possibility that her mother might have already been killed by those men, making it a worst possible outcome. On the other hand, she can surely save this child if she takes her somewhere to get treated now. But then, Jane imagines the little girl won't be really happy that she lived knowing her survival inadvertently caused her mother's death. Damn, is there even a right way get this shit done? Jane thought hard and long, trying to think this through several perspectives. She wondered what the child really wanted to, As she looks into the direction where she came from, with what she sees deeply shocked her. There, she saw a faint red line in a zigzag shape. Her heart sinks as she realizes the little girl must have dragged her wounded body way all the way here, and she's certainly not trying to run. The lines look like the little girl had tried to call for help from all the directions. A silly yet admirably act. In that moment, Jane was sure what needs to be done. The voice in her heart speaks firmly. No time for doubt, Jane. Hang in there, child. I will bring back your mother with you shortly. Jane whisper as she carefully carries the child to lean against the wall and gives her a light pat before taking off her jacket and use it to cover the child's bruised body, praying that the cold weather tonight can actually help slow down her bleeding. With that, Jane took off running as fast as she can. She knows that time isn't something she can spare much right now. In her mind, though, are the images of the woman and her child staring at her with resentment, tears of blood in their eyes. She imagines how much they're going to hate her if she failed them both. If only she act earlier, Jane thought. Yet she know that what done is done. Now she can only try to fix it. Jane continues to run, ignoring her lungs, which have been screaming for her. She was too busy praying for God to give them a little bit more time. Even a few minutes of vigor for them would be enough. Jane prayed, suddenly, and then Jane felt a warm and a sense of reassuring feeling in her heart as she heard voice of people struggling in the distance. A woman's voice. She's alive, Jane thought, as she now runs even faster with a renewed vigor. Finally, she's close. Jane urged her legs to move faster. Stop squirming around, you stupid bitch. The others are still waiting for their turn, you wench. The big guy shout as slapped the woman right across her face, causing her head to bang hard on the ground, drawing more blood from the woman's face, which already riddled with wounds. The big guy shows no concern of it, though, much less his friends, who only been egging on him while watching the whole thing excitedly, cheering happily, as if enjoying the sick scene. Yet the woman shows no sign of giving up. In fact, she shakes off the pain and quickly pushes off the man with all her strength. She knows that her fate will be sealed the moment she give up, gritting her teeth as she tries to ignore the blisters and blood which becoming more painful as she strain herself. Finally, Jane reached them, and she wastes no time, and as she call out the man immediately. Hey, big fart. You're not someone who can takes a hint, eh? Sometimes a no is a no. Big loaf. Now you better get off her before I make you do. Jane shout as she finally reaches them, standing right in front of them. Jane folds her arm while trying to look as calm as she can. In reality, she was already brimming with anger. The looks and wounds on the woman tells Jane that the beating she suffered, part of her is impressed by the woman's will, frail yet hard to break, so they say about a woman's heart. Jane thought as she scanned the woman from down to top, before turning her attention to the man, who is no longer pinning her as he is now looking at Jane. A tint of confusion and shock are in his face as Jane's sudden appearance surprises him. Who the hell are you, bitch? The man says as he looks up, confusion on his face while he narrows his eyes on her, trying to figure out who she is, before he finally smiles and exclaims, Ah, you surprised me, chick. You are the woman from before. Look at you. Half naked right now. Looks like you really want to be raped as well, eh? Fine. I will gladly do that for you, crazy bitch. The man says while giggling excitedly, as his face turned into a creepy smile while he stared at Jane's body, which looks a lot of different. No, she had taken off her jacket. It's not a bombshell body, though. While Jane do have just the right amount of fat in the right places, what distracting is her arms, which are riddled with scars, along with veins protruding through her toned arm, and the man is there, staring at her for quite a moment, before swallowing his saliva and turned to his friends behind and said, Look alive, boys. We got a crazy chick who's asking us to savor her as well. One of you go and grab her, he said while motioning to the trio, whose eye widened in shock, with one of them pointing behind the big man. Hey, don't just stand there. It will be my turn after I. The man's word is cut off mid-sentence as he turns back to face Jane. His creepy smirk soon turns into shock as he realizes that he was about to be kicked by Jane. No time for him to react, though, as gush of wind followed by pain is probably the last thing he felt. No doubt it's an immense pain, as the spinning kick Jane gives him is so strong that it actually thrown the man off the poor woman he'd been pinning on. Jane wasn't kidding when she said she's going to kick him off her, it seems. What result is the big man slamming into hard concrete wall head first, making a loud cracking sound as fresh blood flows out from the top of his head. Apparently, it isn't enough for Jane, as she immediately grabbed the helpless man by the head, ignoring the blood staining her pants, as she then dragged the big man's face across the rough surface, making the poor man screaming in pain as blood flowing out fast from the countless wounds on his face. And when Jane is finally satisfied, she held the man and kneeled him hard on his face, before dropping his lifeless body like a log, leaving all of them in shock, especially the woman, who is now shaking uncontrollably in fear, avoiding looking at Jane in the eye. Perhaps she now feared Jane more than these men before her. It's hard to blame her, though. After seeing Jane in action, her bloodied cloth and hands full of blood, even Jane herself is shocked by what she did, by how cruel she acted, and she's certainly not restraining herself tonight. She wonders why. Perhaps it's the images of the little girl. Somehow seeing the little girl wounds and suffering is making Jane remember her childhood, of the memories she always wanted to forget, the day when her life turned upside down. "Hurry, get up and find your child." Jane's commanding voice brings her some senses into the woman. A look of shock and sadness surface on her face as she remembered how badly they had beat up her child. Guilt fills her heart as she knows that she brought this upon her child. She's not going to last through this night without proper care. Hurry and find her. I'm going to take care of these bastards real quick. Jane continues as she steps over the big guy's limp body and turn to face the still shaken trio. Meanwhile, the woman finally manages to pushes herself off the ground after some struggle, visibly in pain as she pushes herself up fully, and yet she's shown no sign slowing down. Quickly she limped to the direction Jane come from, hoping that she can make in it time, knowing her daughter needed for her seemingly taking all the pain she had before. Man wastes no moment and charges at her, swinging his knife at aiming to slit Jane's throat, going for the kill, as he wear a smile in his face, though it's only for a moment. In an instant, his smile turn into a shock, which then transition into a look of fear, as he feels his knife merely brushes against the air. Turn out, Jane didn't tripped. In fact, she knows that man would swing the knife at her, and she was just building a momentum by bending her knees while she channeled her weight into her fist, swinging at the man as she straightened herself back up. While the man can only look in horror, helplessly trying to dodge. It's too late, though, as Jane is already swinging her fist, delivering a clean uppercut on the man's jaw, shutting it with a terrible cracking sound. It's strong enough to launch the somewhat large man in the air for a few seconds, allowing Jane time to finish him off with an axe kick on the head, slamming his limb body so hard on the ground that Jane almost feels sorry for him, before sound of metal quickly caught Jane's attention. Jane turned her eye into the source of the sound, surprised that it was the last of the trio. Turn out it was him throwing his knife on the ground before taking off running, knowing he probably won't have any chance after seeing the fates of his two companions. Jane shakes her head and smiles. Well, that's unexpected, smiling a little as she watches the man running for his life. Under normal circumstances, Jane will just turn back and let the man go. She doesn't really enjoy hurting others, after all, bad people or not, but not today, she thought, letting this man go and calling, for backup probably is the last thing Jane wants, so she broke into a run too, chasing down the man in the narrow alley, dodging objects the man throws at her, which annoy her rather than slowing her down. She is just way faster than the man that the distance was closed in no time. Yet Jane didn't stop the man when she could. Instead, she slowed down herself to a jog. Jane mumbles as she wonders how she should take down the man. A classic leg trip? Or should I knock him over like the rugby player I watched that day? Wait, I think I got a better idea, Jane suddenly smiles. Her eye brimming with excitement, it seems that she thought of a more dazzling way as she increases her speed once again. This time with a huge burst, and within seconds, she was right behind the man, smiling before she jumps, vaulting over the man, before kneeing him in the side of his head midair, knocking his head on the hard concrete wall, dragging his face against the wall for a few, before Jane turned over and slammed her elbow on the already stunned man, leaving the poor man bleeding profusely as his body dropped down like a rag doll, motionless even after they both hit the ground. For a second, Jane thought she actually went overboard and ended up killed the man. It was until the man started to groan in pain that Jane realizes that he is still alive. Gosh, though I'm done for, now let's call an ambulance for these boys before they actually end up dead for real. Jane exclaims as she picks up the man's phone and fiddles with it for a few seconds, smiling after the emergency call dispatcher picks up the call, knowing that they will survive. All right, now it's time to head back and enjoy a hot bath, Jane continues as she turns around and prepares to leave. Maybe I can even meet the woman and her child on my way home. Jane smiles at the thought itself. It seems that she is still worried about them, worried that they might not survive. Night is cold and dangerous after all. Still, she urged herself to move, not wanting to linger any longer too. Suddenly, a glint catches her attention as she walks past the big guy, who is still lying unconsciously but no longer bleeding from his head. Jane bend down and pick up the metallic object. Turn out it's a card, a rather fancy one for a group of thugs even. Jane inspects with a closer look after wiping the stained card, her eyes wide, and her mouth curl into a smile and whistles. Nicely done, Jane. You have made this whole town your enemy, Jane said whilst laughing. She never thought that these men before her are from Stardust, a club known for its drug dealing and dangerous members. Well, whatever I guess, it is not the first time, and certainly won't be the last time, Jane say, while slapping the card softly on the man's cheek before throwing the card away. Taking a deep breath, deep down she knows, of course, this is going to make her life even harder in this city. Jane gathers her thought as she gets up and prepares to leave. Jane hastened her pace as to clear her thought. To her surprise, no longer than 5 minutes of walk, she saw two approaching figures, a woman and a children. It must be them both, Jane thought. She breathed a relief as she is glad that wounded as they are still breathing and walking at least. All of this are going to be worth it, Jane thought. It's worth enough to see them alive, even though it also means Jane herself may have to face dire consequences. Hey, you both are still here? I thought the two of you already left. You really should, though. The night is still young, so it's not really wise to linger, Jane says with a smile as not to make them panic, yet with a serious tone. Now that Jane knows that it was Stardust's party that she crashed, things are going to get a lot more dangerous, though she still doesn't know what exactly is their problem with Stardust. Hopefully it's just some underling going rogue and nothing serious behind them. Ah, Miss, thanks God that you are okay. We were so worried about you, the woman says with tears in the corner of her eye, her hand shaking with gratitude as she stares at Jane's feet, reluctant to look at her eyes. I don't know how to thank you enough for saving us. Really, we would have died if not for you. Perhaps you are from Beeson, the group that protects the weak and offer people salvation that they speak of, the one who saves the weak and gives them salvation. The woman continues, but now she no longer shivers. Perhaps her fear toward Jane dissipates after seeing Jane up close, despite her shirt stained in blood. Jane, too, is a woman like her after all, even younger than she is. Yet the woman can't really understand, though. How is this woman before her, not much bigger than herself, can throws the man around? Yet after some moment looking at the scars on Jane's body, it's not that hard to imagine what Jane must have been through. The woman thought as she stares at Jane's arms with his riddles with scars, both old and new looking. What? Beacon? I'm not, unfortunately, and well, I don't think that kind of group actually exists. It's like that. It's just a rumor started by someone in hope of luring people, or just some kind of fantasy by some loser in this city, Jane says with a curled eyebrow. Perhaps she didn't expect to hear it from the woman, who's looking all confused too, though, which leaves Jane to continues. And don't get me wrong, I just beat them up because of what they have called me. I can never stand people throwing shit at me, anger and all that, Jane said as she turned away. Her face reddens with embarrassment. Clearly, She doesn't used to be thanked like that by people. Like that by people. Still, she can't help but to link the woman's words with the rumor she'd been hearing. It's probably true, she thought. Someone is spreading rumor about promised help and salvation in order to lure people in. No doubt there are a lot of people falling prey to it. Seeing there's so many helpless people in this city, the woman before her are probably just on the many that have seek them out. Jane wouldn't be surprised that they are much more people looking for this guardian stuff, as with both this mother and daughter before her. And they are lucky that they didn't make it, Jane thought. Even if they didn't have a run-in with the Stardust Junkie, they probably will die at hands of these people. Jane sighed. Yet part of her is glad, though, to have met them. At least now she knows that the rumor behind the disappearance is true. Now, I know where to poke the big ol' snake, Jane thought while grinning. She was getting so excited that she didn't realize that the mother seemed have been hurt by her words earlier. I see, so it's just a dream of a loser like I am. I'm sure is foolish. The woman's voice trails off as she looks at her daughter, who is still resting in her arm, with sadness filled her eyes. Ah, sorry about that. I wasn't talking about you. What I mean is those people who never try to do anything for themselves, instead relying on other to spoon feed them. Jane says in a nervous tone, trying to hide her embarrassment, knowing that what she just said is rude and mean. Anyway, I don't think that's any important right now. What's more important right now is your daughter. She is badly hurt. You might need to take her to see a doctor, or at least somewhere where she can rest safely. Jane continues with a softer and more concerned voice, worried that her words earlier might have hurt the mother more than she thought, who probably felt guilty and sad that she brought it upon her daughter and her. Jane continues with a softer and more concerned voice, worried that her words earlier might have hurt the mother more than she thought, who probably felt guilty and sad that she brought it upon her daughter and her. Yet the woman stays silent, leading Jane to believe she said something wrong again. Suddenly the woman drops down on her knees, tears flowing out her eyes. I don't know, Miss Jane. We don't have anywhere else to go. We don't have anyone else to turn to, the woman says in a sad tone while looking at Jane in a pleading eye, as if asking for Jane help. With Leaves, Jane's somewhat uncomfortable, as she hasn't thought of this. What? What do you mean? Couldn't you just go back from where you come from? How about the child's father, though? Surely there is someone out there. Wait, don't tell me that you were both working at Stardust? Those words blurt out from Jane's mouth, which sounds rather cold. Not that she meant for it to sound that way, though. Just that her instinct is telling her that there's more behind this. Nevertheless, she continues. And you really are from there. Then I think you shouldn't be running from them, miss. I know these guys don't take kindly to people who breached their contract. Jane finished with a slightly puzzled and concerned face, though there is also a tint of anger in her face. Clearly, she would be damned if she actually helped a prostitute to escape from Stardust. Their boss won't take it kindly, as it concerns their reputation of how it might affect how rival gang sees Stardust. God knows what misfortune will come upon them. No, Miss Jane, please believe me. I don't work for Stardust, the woman says while shaking her head adamantly. Before she continues to explain to Jane in details, turn out she had a husband before. Too bad, though. Like most women of her fate, she was married to a loser, drunkard, who never hesitates to raise a hand to both her and her child. He doesn't even care about their lives. In fact, her husband is the one who had sold them to the people from Stardust, probably for a few pack of meth, telling those men that they can do whatever they wanted with the women. Surely, his husband won't be too happy that they had escaped. Not to mention now the buyer are badly injured. She was sure that her husband would murder them both if they are to go back now. The woman finished her story as she pleads with Jane to help them. Yet Jane remains silent. Either she is not moved by the woman's tragic story, or she is just too deep in thought to have respond. Instead, she merely stared back at the woman with a motionless face. It's a lot to take in after all. Jane never thought of this possibilities when she decided to help them, but still she can't help but to doubt the woman's story, for she had learnt the hard way in the past. Deceit and lies are common in this city, especially for a woman, whose life may have to depend on their skill to convince and lying to people. Damn, it's so vexing, Jane thought as she grit her teeth. As to weigh how much truth in the woman's word, surely cooking this kind of story for a prostitute would be a child play. And now that Jane has the chance to look at the woman in more details, she does find the woman's appearance doesn't really add up to her story. Not only her finger is missing a ring, her attire and bright-colored nails certainly are not of a married woman. As much as Jane wanted to believe her, it's just too obvious that the woman is lying to her. The only things that match the woman description is probably the scars in her body, those stripe-like lines which looks like she is being hurt regularly using a belt or something. Then again, it's probably common for a prostitute to be hurt like that. Men who frequent those places are one of the cruelest in the city, after all, Jane concluded in her mind, and she finally speak. I'm sorry, Mallory. I'm afraid that there's nothing I can do about it. You see, I myself is struggling just to keep the water running in my own house, Jane says, before pausing a little, probably still in doubt. Still she continues. I hope that you understand my situation. Good luck, miss. I hope that you can find someone who can actually help, Jane said as she walked away from them into the direction she was heading before while avoiding their gaze. She is afraid that her heart might waver if she met their eyes. Oh, you can keep the jacket, though. It's all but I can offer, Jane said, without turning around. Yet in the corner of her eyes, she can see that both of them are kneeling in the ground, embracing each other, as if their heart is filled with so much despair that they can't even keep their legs straight. Mum, are we going to be okay? I don't want to go back that place, please. The little girl, who is no longer closing her eyes, said softly in an innocent's tone, while the woman merely hugs the child's tighter. No doubt that very question is also on the woman's mind. No being to answer is making her feel even worse inside. Still, after some moment of silence, the woman finally says, Yeah, don't worry, my child. Big Sis is going to get help for us here. The woman says in an assuring tone despite what tear flowed through her eyes. To be honest, she doesn't even know why she said that, despite knowing Jane is leaving them to fend for themselves. Jane manages to catch their conversation, though, before they are no longer audible, and it seems that the words has great effect to her. Even as Jane was already quite far away, she still can't keep it off her mind. She even tripped a few times as she walks. The images of the mother and child plays like a movie in her head. She even looked back from time to time, secretly hoping that the woman might chase her. Maybe then she will help them. Just a little more push, maybe. That's what Jane thought as she looked into the dark and empty street behind her. She knew that the chance that they might actually survive is slim now. It would be very bad for them if there is no one to help. Jane knew what it feels like to be living on the street. It was already bad when Jane was young, and it's even worse now. Sometimes you have to risk your life for even a single loaf of bread, and by some cruel fate, just to have the loaf of bread taken away by someone stronger and fiercer than you are. It's what they call a dog-eat-dog world out there. Those who are weak won't survive. Not to mention that she have an injured child to care for. That's almost a death sentence for them. Somehow, it's like Jane saved them from a certain death just to push them into a slower and more painful one. That thought plagues Jane's mind as she continues to walk, much slower than she intended to, though, as if her body is being dragged back by some unseen force, one that comes from her ever-confusing heart, and it's been like that for a while now. Ever since she was betrayed by her friend, Jane always had a hard time to believe in herself and others. She would constantly question what people told her, as if the shadow of her past wouldn't let her go, even after what she had to endured. Deep down, she's just afraid that she might make mistakes again, afraid to hurt people around her, afraid of angering Mother. But the thing that she feared the most is actually the laugher and looks on the face of people who betrayed and tricked her. It's a look that Jane can never seem to forget. Even after all these years, Jane admit she still resent the people who did that. It changed her life and how she sees the world they live in. It's a selfish reason, Jane knows, of course. She was once nothing but a little girl living on the street, too. If not for her mother, who adopted her in the past, Jane is sure that she wouldn't able to learn about writing, much less becoming a journalist. Such is fate. Jane thought, for all her life, she always have this thought on her mind, that the world and people life revolve and changes with even the smallest decision. The outcomes of all these small decisions eventually piles up, leads to what we call fate, butterfly effect. The word ring and repeat itself several times inside her mind. She thought, what if meeting the woman and her child is another fate in the works? Jane thought, as she is now standing still by the corner of the street. What if the meeting was for me to change their fate? All this talk about making difference, and now the chance is here. Yet I'm wavering. God damn, Jane, make up your damn mind already. Jane berates herself for being such a coward. She wonders what her mom would say if she saw her now. She told her mother that reason she's returning to Sin City is to make a change after all. Jane continues to mumbles inaudibly while continues to walk, nearly tripping herself as a result. Suddenly, a strong headlight from a car shone at her face, nearly blinding her if she didn't quickly sidestep inside the pavement, and the car swooshed by with great speed. Clearly, the driver doesn't have a care for others safely, as it swirled fast on the corner, blaring loud horns even. "Watch it, man! It's dangerous to do that," Jane shouted at the driver after regaining her balance. Yet the men inside simply laugh it off. One of them even whistles, just to show that they don't even care about what happened to her. The driver did slow in down for an instant, though, barely a second. Still, it was enough for their eyes to meet. Jane was taken aback by shock. It was the first time she saw his face, but from people's description of him, Jane realized that it's Aiden himself who drives the car, the infamous boss of Stardust, whose ruthlessness and cruel acts spread far and wide through the city. Clearly, Jane didn't expect to see him here, not this soon after what she'd done to his man. Yet she didn't show any fear. Instead, she stared him down, as if daring him to stop, which he don't. Although he did frown for a moment, he didn't expect that anyone dares to stare him down, much less a lone woman, such as what Jane is doing now. He quickly looks away, though, and instead punched more speed onto his car, seemingly not too keen on joining Jane's staring contest. Ch! What a prick. Does he think he owned this city? They are the reason the city come into this state, Jane thought as she lashed out in anger with the metal rubbish bin being the victim. Poor thing's lid bended so much that it actually dropped into the bin. Wait, Jane thought, apparently, they are going somewhere in a hurry. Are they going to the direction of the mother and child? Jane curses as she has now regained her composure, with her face turned pale as she realized that they are in danger. Without much thought, Jane broke into a run, back toward where she had left them. She has to be fast. She knows that it would haunt her forever if both of them are killed because of her. After all, it was Jane that beat up those men. She should bear the consequence, not the harmless mother and her child. She prays as she continues to run, not stopping even as her chest starts to hurt. Finally, she slows to a jog after she sees two shadowy figures sitting leaning against the wall. The dark alley might have concealed them from Aiden and his gang when to swoop past. It's a good thing that they are speeding. "Thank goodness you two are still here," Jane exclaimed in relief as her face turns into a smile, before leaning on the building herself, resting herself as she tries to catch her breath. She had run so fast that half her shirt are wet now. "Are you all right, Miss Jane? You look really exhausted," the woman says with a concerned face, while trying to force a smile while she reaches out her hand for Jane, trying to support her, despite the confused situation she is because of Jane's sudden return, though Jane quickly brushed her off. "I'm fine. Now is not the time. Hurry, get your child up. We have to get away from here now," Jane said as she takes another deep breath before she pushes herself off the wall, leaving the woman looking all anxious now. "What is it, Miss Jane? Did something happen?" The woman throws away more question, looking even more confused now. Hard to blame her, though, with tension around. It's easy for someone to get worried. "Listen, ma'am, I don't have the time to explain. Long story short, I just saw Stardust's boss and his men heading to where I first found you. It won't be long until they find out what happened," Jane explained in a serious tone. The woman needed this info after all. She has to know what is actually going on, though it leaves the woman all looking pale. Now, the question is, where should we go? Jane continues, ignoring the woman who has been shaking in fear the moment she heard the name Aiden. One can only imagine the horror this man has brought to her before. Please, Miss Jane, please just keep my daughter safe for me. I will go and buy you too, as much as time I could, even if it cost my life.